And we're back. You're listening to the Talking Boxing with Billy C show. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter. It's at Talkin Boxing. TalkinBoxing. And while you're at it, don't forget about our website, www.billycboxing.com. Check it out. You'll notice some changes. Some things are being added. Some other things are being removed. I think you're going to like it. And don't forget about my book, Tom Molyneux, From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet. It's available right now where all good books are sold. And you could literally pick it up right now by visiting barnesandnoble.com or amazon.com. Now, if you're looking for the electronic versions, fear not, because it's available on Nook and Kindle as well. And if you need to get a signed copy for your collection, no problem. Just visit our website, www.billycboxing.com, and click on the book club section and follow the directions. Joining me right now is Daxx Khan. What's up, Dax?
Hello, Billy C.
How you making out? How you making out today?
Yeah, I've been enjoying this warm weather. I just kind of wish this. We spoke earlier today. This, I know you're having it too. This virus or this flu or whichever it is, it keeps circulating around. Every time you feel a little better, all of a sudden, it comes back and bites you.
Yeah, that's what's happening to me. And I haven't gotten the warm weather I keep hearing about yet. I'm hoping that it gets warm. I know Joel was just telling me in the chat room it's going to be in the 70s down by you guys. I did hear it's going to be in the high 50s later in this week. It can't get here soon enough. But anyway, we got some interesting fights this week, and unfortunately not all of them are going to be available on U.S. television. And I know you picked out 3 fights. Talk about these guys. Talk about them. Let me know. I know you're going to do David Lemieux and James De La Rosa, Stephen Butler, and whoever he's fighting. I'm not going to pronounce his name. And the
Sladyan Janjin.
Jin, right?
Yeah, Yan Janjin.
And Rigondeaux and Jazza Dickens, which might be an interesting fight.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to all 3 of these fights. I think are going to be good fights. And neither one of those cards are in the States. And actually, until you just mentioned a little while ago, I wasn't aware that Deportes had picked up the Lemieux card.
Yeah, Fox Deportes will have the David Lemieux card. It was announced late today, this afternoon. So, and it's funny because when they announced that fight, I remember Lemieux's team promising that they were going to get some U.S. television. Then you never heard anything about it, and you're saying, well, I guess nobody anteed up. But Fox Deportes finally cut the deal, so that will be available in the U.S. But you're going to start off with that fight, right, David Lemieux?
Yeah, we're going to start off with the David Lemieux fight, against James De La Rosa. I kind of like this fight. I'm glad to see David Lemieux getting back into the ring so quickly. David Lemieux, the pros on him, of course, out of his 31 of 34 wins, or by stoppage, David Lemieux possesses speed. A lot of people don't give him credit for that. When he lets his hands go, David Lemieux is very hard to deal with when he combines that speed and his power together. And he has underrated footwork and head movement. Across from him, James De La Rosa, the pros on him, Bill, he's a switch hitter, and he can fight equally from both orthodox and southpaw, and he punches from odd angles. And he's very accurate with his punches. He's kind of a hard guy at time, and he always keeps you thinking. The cons on David Lemieux, even though he has better than average head movement and footwork, sometimes David Lemieux, over his career, we've noticed, he can be a little bit of a jerky, and he can be timed, and David Lemieux wastes a lot of energy. Too much energy, and we've seen him gas in a few fights because of it. Always moving his head or jumping side to side. He hasn't quite perfected that part of his game yet. Getting better, but not where he should be. The cons on James De La Rosa is inactivity. His last fight was in 2014. De La Rosa, he tends to pose after landing a big punch to see what happens next, and he keeps his hands low, leaving himself open for counters. I think he kind of does that because he's a slick puncher, and he knows that the angles that he lands at keeps his guys guessing. His biggest flaw is he waits a little bit too long before letting his hands go. He's accurate, but sometimes you need to stay busy as well as be accurate. What they each need to do to win, I think, De La Rosa, of course, needs to avoid standing in front of Lemieux and kicking, turning, so David Lemieux can't set down his punches. If he can do that, Lemieux might fade late, and De La Rosa can win some rounds. David Lemieux, he just needs to settle down. He needs to box. He needs to keep his hands moving. Don't waste pointless energy. Most of all, forget about the Triple G loss. Forget about trying to put on a show back in front of your hometown crowd. Just worry about what's right in front of you, and I think David Lemieux is going to win this. That's my final prediction. David Lemieux, Bill, this is a great return fight for him against a great opponent. It's going to make him look good. It's going to help build his confidence. And at 27, I think David Lemieux is still learning and getting better, and he's a fighter he doesn't get enough credit for his skill set.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think David Lemieux is going to win this fight, and he's going to look good doing it. And I also agree with you that he's young, and he's still. I hate to say this because it contradicts what I say, because he was a former world champion. But again, this guy, was basically handed the title and was still in developmental stage. When he was with Russ Ambers, I remember calling a couple of his fights up in Canada, and they were really, really overprotecting this guy. They knew that he had virtually no amateur career, that he had a lot of pop, and that he was going to be a star, but they were being very careful. And then all of a sudden, we all know what happened. He lost a couple of fights, and I think he's getting better and better now. And you're right, James De La Rosa is the perfect opponent because James De La Rosa is not a terrible fighter at all. He's a good fighter, but I think that Lemieux, like you, I think Lemieux will win, and I think he's going to learn something from this fight.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm a big David Lemieux fan. As when the two losses that you slated to, that's something that you blame his team on more than you can't really blame the fighter. They put him in there with two very experienced veteran fighters at a developmental stage. They kind of jumped the gun a little bit, and we see that happen quite often. And it kind of sets guys back instead of bringing them forward. And I think that kind of set David Lemieux back a few years.
Well, you know what the thing was, Dax, with Lemieux, is that David Lemieux relied so much on his punching power, and we see it even today with any fighter that rocks a fight, rocks his opponent or her opponent early in the fight. Next thing you know, what are they doing? They're headhunting. They don't get back to the basics and let the knockouts come. And I think that is really, a whole showcase of what David Lemieux was about. I think that, a couple of those losses against those kind of cagey veteran type fighters, and, some of his fights that he had to fight against guys that had movement, I think he's realizing his conditioning was questioned, remember? And he showed us that, he's gotten serious with conditioning, and he's becoming an all-around better fighter. And, we haven't, like we said, after he lost to Triple G, we didn't see the end of David Lemieux. We're going to see a better David Lemieux in the future. And this fight this weekend, I think, is a good step.
The Triple G loss, in my opinion, actually, it wasn't a bad loss. David Lemieux went in there and did what David Lemieux was supposed to do. The fight before then, when he won his title, he looked spectacular. What I didn't expect in that fight was a different version of Triple G. I didn't expect Triple G to come out there with that jab and just control. So David Lemieux, he really didn't do that bad in that fight, even though a lot of people don't give him the credit he deserves. Where a lot of the credit should be in that fight was where Triple G just showed everybody a whole new dimension of himself, and that's where the shocker was, even for David Lemieux's team.
Well, I think Triple G, and it really bothers me, and you and I have talked about this a zillion times, it bothers me that people don't give him the credit. And nothing for nothing, but Triple G does not think he's invincible. And the indication that he doesn't is the fact that he employed his jab against David Lemieux because he respected David Lemieux's punching power. And the way you fight a guy with a lot of power is you establish your jab. You control the distance. I sound like Harold Letterman. You establish your jab, Dax. But but it's true. It's true. But anyway, Stephen Butler. He's in a big fight.
We'll go to it's going to be on the undercard of Lemieux and De La Rosa. It's a super welterweight bout between undefeated guys, young guys too. Stephen Butler's only 20, and Sladian, he's only 24 years old. This is actually for a minor title. I think it's for a vacant IBF Youth Super Well title. So this tells me that whoever wins this, they have a lot of hopes for. They're going to step up and within another year or two be on that next level. For Stephen Butler, the pros on him is he has power and he has confidence. He punches in combinations and he doesn't stand there long enough for his opponents to return fire. After Stephen Butler lets his hands go, he moves right away. So this way his opponents don't have a chance to tag him. And when you're 20 years old, you have a lot of energy. That's fabulous. The pros on Yan Janin, he has fair movement. He works well behind the jab, and when using the jab and the follow-up right hand, despite the quality of opposition, he has genuine power. It's not one-punch power, but it's the kind that makes guys respect him before moving in recklessly. Now, the cons on Butler is he keeps his hands down all the time. He moves straight back. Now, why he doesn't stay there long enough for guys to counter him, stand in front of him, he goes straight backwards, and the guys, with a little bit of speed, of course, that's going to play right into their hand. His footwork is subpar. It seems he can only go in two directions, Bill, forward and backward. The only time he goes side to side is if his opponent is going side to side. Even then, he's going forward and backward with his punches. He's a little bit of an egomaniac, of course, again, at 20 years old, and, you're undefeated. That's what happens. He doesn't show his opponents too much respect, and, again, that has to do with the age, and this is the fight right here where I think it's going to kind of see it on a new dimension of him. Now, over on Yan Janin, the quality of competition, as I said, his last 6 are combined, 29 and 51. His last opponent was stopped 28 times prior, and his opponent prior never won a fight. He's a bit overconfident and believes in his resume and that undefeated record. Coming from Bosnia, being one of only, I think, 5 junior welterweights, he's a big fish in a very small pond. He's never fought in front of a big crowd. What each guy must do to win. Janin here, he needs to realize this is a whole new level. He needs to come in knowing that this is not like one of his hometown fights. He can't allow himself to get overwhelmed. He needs to stay busy and stay moving and take advantage of his superior footwork. For Butler, he needs to take advantage of the competition that Yan hasn't faced. He needs to go after Yan early before he has a chance to build up any confidence and realize Butler has zero defense. And he can feed off the hometown crowd, which is an advantage. Why you got one guy in one corner who's never been in front of somebody this big. You got another guy who's going to feel electric because everybody's going to be chanting his name, and that's why my final prediction here is Stephen Butler.
I agree with you. Stephen Butler is a young fighter on the rise. This is going to be a big win for him. I think he's going to win decisively. Jan Jin is a fighter that, like you said, this is what we're seeing. It's a continuation of the same stuff that I've been talking about tonight. You get these fighters, they have these built-up records that look good on paper, and the young fans are buying it, man. They're buying into it. Oh, this guy must be good. He's undefeated. And they're not looking at the fights, and I'm sorry. I don't care, how many wins you have. If you're not challenging yourself and if you're not stepping up your level of opposition, you're at the same level as when you started. And, you may be getting a little more polished, but you're not fighting the tougher guys. And I'm not saying Stephen Butler has fought all the tough opposition either, but he has fought tougher opposition than Jan Jin, and I'm definitely going with Butler as well.
Right, and you bring up a valid point, with the because Stephen Butler, is a young fighter who's building a fan base and he has faced better competition. The better competition is why I'm picking him, but, because he's building up the fan base, I think Jan Janin, this is a guy they picked for, his PR. This is somebody to help boost his career. As you stated, he looks great on paper because he has the O, and nobody really knows anything about him. They've never seen him before, so as far as they know, this guy could be a killer. He could have fought nothing but tomato cans. The only thing they know is that it's a 0 on that resume, and when they're sending out the press releases, that looks great. It's a prospect with a win over another undefeated prospect. Good for Butler, bad for Butler, you never know, because if he did lose this fight, something that could really plummet your career because all of a sudden you lost to a nobody.
Well, the thing is the people reading those press releases and a lot of the fans are going to think it's a tough fight because of the undefeated record. But make no mistake, Butler's team knows who they're getting. They wouldn't have picked him if they didn't. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely, I have to agree.
Guillermo Rigondeaux against Jazza Dickens, and Dickens he made some comments about this fight, and Rigondeaux kind of is looking past this fight. Is this one of those fights that maybe you shouldn't be looking past Dickens? Is he ready for Rigondeaux? Break this one down.
I really like this fight. You got the styles. This right here, I'll say before we even get started here, Bill, this is going to be a fight that's really not for fight fans. This is strictly for boxing fans, if you know what I mean. Guillermo Rigondeaux, the pros on him, he does everything well. It's hard to find any flaws in Rigondeaux. He's elusive, he's a master counterpuncher, and he has decent power. Rigondeaux has a solid chin. Despite being on the deck several times, watching him in action is kind of watching like a video of everything a fighter shouldn't do if you were training him, yet it's everything you want a fighter to be able to do once they reach that certain level. The pros on Jazza Dickens is he's confident, he's a slick counterpuncher who frustrates opponents, and he has elite caliber footwork and ring awareness. By ring awareness, I mean he always knows exactly where in the ring he is, how far he is away from the ropes, and so on. Dickens' biggest asset, in my opinion, is he knows how to keep opponents focused on what he does. He has a little bit of swag inside that ring. Sometimes he moves his hips, swirl the hand around, and it makes guys worry about, him. Is he going to try and be slick? Is he going to try and be cagey? And they underestimate him, and that's a great asset. Not that he's anything like, but you remember that stuff like Hector Camacho or Ray Leonard used to do. When they were younger. A lot of flash, and it kind of threw the opponents off, especially when the opponents are all business. The cons on Guillermo Rigondeaux, though, his punch output is low at times, and it's too low because he's so defensive-minded. While he's fighting that style, he's almost impossible to hit clean, but on hostile territory where judges are looking for any reason to make sure you don't fight one of those hometown stars, that can be costly. His one other flaw is he has lapses in focus. When fights are going his way too much, he'll be off balance at times, like I mentioned earlier, and he'll go down from even glancing shots. His chin is great, but again, they can be costly on the scorecards if you have the wrong judges. Now, for Jazza Dickens, the cons on him is sometimes he's too overconfident. He showboats a little bit too much. When in against another counterpuncher, showboating can get you tagged and dropped. In Dickens' case, it happened to him against Kid Galahad. Galahad is nowhere near the caliber fighter of Guillermo Rigondeaux. Dickens isn't a big puncher. He makes it hard to keep opponents honest. Usually his slick style is what does it for him. What each needs to do to win here, Bill, Rigondeaux just needs to be Rigondeaux. He needs to be slick, counterpunch, avoid getting off balance as he looks to make Dickens miss and catch him with counters. Dickens, don't get mesmerized by Rigondeaux's movement. How many guys get mesmerized by what Guillermo Rigondeaux does? Pound-for-pound fighters have done it. Remember, you're at home. They don't want Rigondeaux to face Frampton. Let your hands go. Even if they're not meaningful shots, just be busy. You're at home. You can build up points. You can win with the crowd behind you. The judges know who wants you to win, so that's what you have to do to beat Rigondeaux. But my official pick here, though, is Guillermo Rigondeaux. This is a fun fight. Both are the defensive fighters who like to counterpunch and avoid shots. They both come with style, so it won't be boring to, as they stated before, Bill, the boxing purists, the boxing fans. It might be a little boring to the fight fans, but I'm going to enjoy this one.
No doubt. I think that Rigondeaux is also vowed to put on an exciting show, something that he's been criticized time and time again. So maybe Jazza Dickens.
That's why I say, for boxing fans, not fight fans, because really, what's boring about some of the stuff he does? You know what I mean? He's when he goes in the ring, like the Donaire fight, a lot of people still criticize that fight, but it was a masterpiece in there. And again, that's why I say, if you're training a young fighter and you're bringing him up, and Guillermo Rigondeaux is not the guy you show tape of. Just like a Pernell Whitaker, doing at his prime, you wouldn't show him footage of that. But once you get a fighter who's seasoned and you know what they have, you'd want them to be able to do exactly everything Rigondeaux can do.
Speaking of masterpieces, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was my favorite movie of all time. But anyway, some fights this weekend. What was your thoughts on Luis Ortiz? I know you're high on him.
Yeah, well, Luis Ortiz, hey, I listened to your comment before about Bernard Hopkins, and on our Talking Boxing Twitter account, I had actually sent out something on there, where Hopkins just kept repeating on there, you're supposed to get rid of him. He should have got rid of him by now. I was like, Bernard, why don't you just say, Golden Boy wanted you to look better than this by now. You should have got rid of him, because it really is, every time he's in there, it seems like, they're trying to sell him. I don't know if they're trying to sell him as vulnerable. I don't know if they're trying to sell him as invincible. But, they're kind of unfair to him in there. Now, Tony Thompson, here's a guy who's a slick veteran. And I think Luis Ortiz, he's smart, he knew, don't go in there and be reckless, go in there and box smart, because even at 44 years old, even though he's not fast, he's never been fast, he does know all the tricks. He's been in there with a guy who, one of the most dominant heavyweights, of all time. I don't care what anybody says, and especially when he was at his best, he managed to go a lot of rounds with Vladimir Klitschko. So you know what? Why chance it? And he went. I guess you say Luis Ortiz went in there as a professional and did what he was supposed to do. Even when he had Tony Thompson hurt, he didn't rush in. He didn't take chances. And I think maybe he kind of thought about Tony Thompson's last few fights or against a guy like David Price, who was a big kid, strong puncher, nowhere near the skill set of Luis Ortiz. But, he was the guy who went in there and he got caught by Tony Thompson and he got knocked out twice. I don't see anything wrong with what Luis Ortiz did in there. Tony Thompson was there, to kind of make him look good. But again, Luis Ortiz, this is his livelihood. He's not going to go in there and take any chances. Why should he?
Luis Ortiz, I think, is being a little overrated. He's not invincible by any stretch of the imagination. However, I do notice one thing that really sticks out. This guy's attitude has changed. He's a better fighter since the Bryant Jennings win. I mean, he's different than he was. Remember, I got to see him when he first came over to the U.S. I called a couple of his fights, and I see a difference in Luis Ortiz. And I could see why other fighters, risk versus reward. I mean, this is a big guy who's got hand speed. He's got movement. He clearly has punching power. He's a guy that other fighters in the heavyweight division are going to want to avoid. And the other thing is Ortiz is no spring chicken at 36 years old. So the time is now for him. It's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds. And according to the WBA, they have a plan in place. So I think Ortiz happens to have the right belt to get some opportunities.
You have to agree, with everything that you just stated, and the age factor. That's important, because Luis Ortiz, that kind of ties in with what I was saying. He knows he doesn't have a lot of time, so why take any chances of being upset, even against an aged Tony Thompson? Why take any chances? As the old saying goes, get the W this time, look sensational next time. We've seen him look sensational in the past. He had the PED issues, but I think the Bryant Jennings fight kind of erased that and didn't totally erase it, but showed he as a clean fighter he can be just as spectacular. And Bryant Jennings obviously is at a better time in his career, more skilled than a Tony Thompson is. So it's not like this is a guy who is looking for opponents that can just make him look good. He'll fight anybody, and the fans who don't know any better are the ones that are going to criticize. Max Kellerman kind of got on my nerves, with the continuous, and that again ties in with what I was saying on how, I don't know if they're trying to sell him as a monster or trying to sell him as overrated so more guys will sign to fight him. But every time he got punched, you heard Max Kellerman saying, no, he just got punched there from a jab from an aged Tony Thompson. Does this make a lot of guys want to fight him more? I would be, if I had my heavyweight, I'd want him to fight Luis Ortiz. He's looking vulnerable here.
Yeah, listen, the commentating that's been going on in this sport has been terrible, in my opinion. It's just, I think back, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and it was interesting. I wanted to hear what they had to say. Now I fast forwarded, but Jesse Vargas, what a great fight that was. And, I see a lot of holes in Jesse Vargas's game, Dax. He just doesn't have the defense I'd like to see him have. But, man, this kid's got heart, and he showed what we were talking about last week with Saddam Ali and his lack of quality opposition. And Jesse Vargas, although he's had his hot and cold performances, he has fought some pretty tough guys. And, I really think that Jesse Vargas has reached his plateau, sort of. And I think we're going to see Jesse improve from fight after fight after fight. And Saddam Ali, we might have seen the very best Saddam Ali. I can't stand Andre Rozier, the trainer. I know he's been with these guys a long time, whatever, but he's just not that good of a trainer, and I think it showed on Saturday.
I think Andre Rozier's whole reputation, in my opinion, was based off that short amount of time when all those guys were, the chin checkers, when they were all walking through this low caliber competition and they were looking invincible. And pretty much that's where, his name, surfaced as one of the top trainers. But I have to agree with you, overall, he's not that impressive. As far as Jesse Vargas, that was, one of those fights. I mean, was it last? I think you changed my mind. That's why I ended up picking Jesse Vargas at the last minute. Saddam Ali, if he changed trainers, I think he would benefit greatly. You brought up a valid point earlier in the show when you were stating that you really didn't hear any instruction from the corner about changing the style of what he was doing. It was more or less cheerleading. Saddam Ali, I was sitting there wondering to myself as I watched the fight, you're giving this away. And what I meant by that, as I was thinking this, he's giving away because he was throwing one punch at a time and moving. We see that a lot with fast fighters, who punch from angles and who are slick, however you want to put it. They let their hands go. They hit the guy and then they move out of the way. But you got to do it in twos or threes. It's something I was saying about Jazza Dickens, what he has to do against Rigondeaux. You got to let your hands go. And, letting your hands go, you build up points on the cards, and that's what Saddam Ali should have done, knowing that, Jesse Vargas is durable, he can take a lot of punishment, and when, you go on I forget, was it the last round or second to last round, when, you knocked Timothy Bradley down, and he was kind of robbed in that fight. Look what he just did to, one of the top 5 or top 3 pound-for-pound fighters in the world, so, I blame the corner 100%, and I think Ali, he'll be back. I don't think this is the end of his career, but again, if he doesn't leave Andre Rozier, he's not going to go any further. I have to agree with you on that point.
Well, the thing with Vargas is he had the hand speed. I'm sorry, with Ali, he had the hand speed and the movement. And you're right. If he would have landed 2s and 3s and then kept circling around, he could have stole that fight from Jesse, because Jesse is a stalker. He wants to cut the ring down. His hands are down so you can score with those shots. And he's trying to cut the ring off. He's trying to get in so he can land a bomb. And because he's hurt these fighters in the past, he's in his mind, he's a knockout puncher. And that's how he's fighting. Now, I think he is getting better. He's becoming more accurate with his punches, and the end result is he's knocking these guys out. But a fast fighter with hands, fast hands and fast feet, and if they employ the right game plan, where they're actually, doing like a Terrence Crawford, where they're throwing punches and moving out of the way, rather than the Floyd Mayweather way, where you hit once and run to the other side of the ring. You see, a lot of these fighters, and I said this earlier, Dax, and no disrespect to Floyd, because there's only one Floyd, but a lot of fighters are trying to win with the way Floyd was able to. Floyd was able to get away with it. These other fighters are not. And in a sense, it's ruined a whole young crop of fighters, in my opinion. Before I let you go, I wanted to ask you about a fight that really bothered me. Not because I got it wrong either, but Antoine Douglas is a fighter I know you've seen ringside. I've seen him ringside. Who could forget his mother? She's the most noisy fan I've ever seen, but. Here's a prime example, Dax, where what my topic of the day, where fighters are coddled and they're not given a chance to get better. And no disrespect to Antoine Douglas, because I see a lot of potential in this kid. He's got heart. He's got natural boxing ability. He may not have the right team around him, but he's got it all. What he doesn't have is he didn't have the experience level to fight guys like Kurtzy, who came at you, who was conditioned, and you could see the wind being let out of his sails. He lost his confidence, and then when he went back to his corner, Dax, his corner was blatantly showing him that they lost confidence, and he just dwindled, and the end result was a knockout loss. What was your thoughts on this fight and my points about Douglas?
This, again, I hate to keep repeating on how stuff ties in, but as you stated earlier on with Dave Lemieux, when he was throwing in some tough fights earlier, but Dave Lemieux, he was put in there against some big names, unlike Antoine Douglas. Now, I don't know who actually was the matchmaker for this. I think it was Nelson Lopez Jr., or it might have been John Bonatti. they should have realized who they were putting him in there with. You know, there's this, however you want to say, this notion or this predisposition about fighters from Europe, and it still happens even though these Europeans, Bill, are starting to become the dominant fighters of the sport. You know, if they really don't know them and they really don't see much on them, you know, they're kind of labeled as Eurobums. Yet, here we go, a guy with like Curtsy, he actually has some exposure in the United States, and he's been in there against a lot of tough guys, and he's a former world champion. Did anybody realize this is a former world champion right here? You know, over where he comes from, you know, a lot of his early fights over in Georgia is a spot where these guys, they don't have a big talent pool of opponents to go with. Even like he said himself after the fight, a lot of my sparring partners are tougher than him. Why? Because guys over there, they're just tough guys. What they do is, if you want to go back 100 years to the days where they towed the line, and that's pretty much what it is. Toe the line, they'll stand there and they'll just punch each other and see who comes out ahead. If you ever had a chance to see, I don't even know if there's footage of it. I've seen footage one time. He fought a guy named Kuvancic Tugabov. They call him Kuna, and that's pretty much what they do. They just stand right in front of each other and just see who can take the most punishment. And you know, scorecards actually don't even really matter. He also had fights against Attila Kovacs, Melvin Bantercourt. You know, he's beaten a lot of good guys. The first time I seen him was last February at the Westchester Inn in the Hilton Inn in Westchester. It was on the undercard of Samuel Clarkson and Cedric Agnew, which was a Broadway boxing card. That night, too, was also the first time I even seen Sergey Derevchenko. And literally what he did this night, too, in terms of Curtsy, he walked over another prospect that night, Philip Benson. And I think it was only 1 or 2 rounds. He started the fight much like he finished the Antoine Douglas fight. You know, these guys, Georgia, right near Russia, you know, where these guys are all tough guys, and, you know, the whole sport, whether it's, you know, your Triple G, whether it's your Sergey Kovalev, you know, your Derevchenko, name whoever it is, you know, these guys have one mentality, even Ruslan Provokanov, you know, they have one mentality, Bill, that's come in there and fight. If they get the win, that's great, but you know something, they're just concentrating on that, what's in front of them. And when you get a young guy like Antoine Douglas, a prime example and a very valid point which you brought up is he wasn't prepared, and because he wasn't prepared, he's a boxer, he's not a fighter, and Curtsy is a fighter. He's the guy you want on your back if you're in the bar and a brawl breaks out. Antoine Douglas is the type of guy that you want, you know, in the gym to get your work done, to prepare for the big fight. That's the difference.
You know, Douglas, you know, was not... the guy had the height and arm reach and the boxing ability and the slickness, right? He didn't utilize any of those things. You know, instead, he was letting Curtsy do what he wanted to do, which was get up in his wheelhouse and making an inside fight. And not once did I hear his corner tell him to box, use your arm reach, move around. I didn't hear him say that. You know, maybe they did. You know, like I said, I don't really pay attention to the commentating anymore, and they weren't saying anything. It was just, you know, and I'm looking at the scorecards. Even my man Steve Farhood, who I usually agree with, you know, he's scoring some of those early rounds for Douglas, and I'm saying to myself, what fight's he watching? You know, how could, you know, I mean, after I think maybe the 5th round and 6th round, you know, you could have said, yeah, maybe Douglas, but that's it. You know, those first few rounds, they weren't. Douglas wasn't winning those rounds, you know, and you know, it goes back to what I'm saying. These guys are overprotected so much that when they get put in, like he should have been against a Curtsy before, you know, maybe not as tough, but a guy that comes at you, a guy that is trying to make an inside fight, a guy that's shorter than you, all those attributes that Curtsy brought, it clearly was something that this kid never saw before, you know, and you know, that's the problem with the sport today. They don't give these kids enough time to actually develop and let them learn from their mistakes. Now you're going to hear how many people are going to start to say Antoine Douglas was exposed, he was nothing, he was this, he was that, and it's not fair because the kid is a quality fighter.
He wasn't exposed. He was just put in against the opponent he wasn't prepared for. You know, really, you know, there's nothing else you can say about that. You bring up a valid point. They should have had him in there with a diverse type of opponents to prepare him. But I think we were speaking earlier before about, you know, it says the O on the resume. You know, Antoine Douglas, he's got 2 O's on his resume, and they were impressive fights. But of course, it was against Thomas Lamana, and I think it was Istvan Zili. You know, who were they and who did they really beat? You know, the guy with the best resume in terms of opponents that Antoine Douglas has beat was actually his last fight, and that's against Les Sherrington. You know, and Les Sherrington, again, really, who was he beat? Now Kirksey, when you look at his history, he's beaten a lot of good guys, a lot of veterans. You know, he's lost only to a world champion. He's a former world champion, and when he lost to, I think it was Hassan Nadam, back when Nadam was in his prime and undefeated, you know, he lost by decision. He, you know, was never knocked out, where he might have been knocked out one time early in his career. You know, I can't. Matter of fact, you know something, it was because I remember that. I was actually at the fight. I remember when Tony Sewer Marshall.
Tony Marshall? Oh yeah, he did. That's right.
My man Sewer Marshall.
That's
you know,
right.
You know, he's a hometown guy from up in Albany, and that was actually on a Pugnacious Promotions card. But yeah, that was the only loss of. That's the only time that Kirksey was actually stopped.
Well, I thought he beat Tony Marshall too, though, didn't he?
I don't think so. And that was Kirksey only had about 8 or 9 fights, and that might have been his first appearance inside the. His first appearance in the United States.
No, you're right. When I was looking at his, I think Tony Marshall beat him, and I said, "Oh man," because Tony Marshall was finished by that time. That was like one of his comeback fights, I think, when he fought him. So yeah. Huh. Hey, I lied. I got one more question. You got to give me your thoughts on Lucas Brown beating Shagayev. It's a pick that we both got wrong. I think Shagayev should hang him up at this point. No disrespect to Lucas Brown, but he seems very one-dimensional. But he got the win on Saturday. What's your thoughts about that? And the shakeup now with the heavyweight division. I mean, you know, I made a comparison to the way the heavyweight division was when I said it was the dinosaur period. You know, guys like Greg Page, Tim Witherspoon, Jerry Coetzee, Mike Weaver, Pinklin Thomas. You know, when you had those kinds of champions running around, all of a sudden we kind of got the same type of guys, it seems.
Well, I've always been a fan of Lucas Brown, and I know that, you know, you've gotten on me for that. And not because I think Lucas Brown is a great fighter, but he's a hard worker. Yes, he's definitely limited, but, you know, I like guys who work hard and try and make the best of, you know, whatever they have, you know, whether it's limited or not. You know, if you remember last week when I broke down that fight, I did say if Ruslan Shagayev comes in there in horrible shape, he could get upset. Ruslan Shagayev came in there looking like Roy Big Country Nelson from the UFC. His gut was hanging out. He had a big beard on him. So, you know, with those long layoffs, and I think taking those fights against opponents, because another thing, you know, I don't want to lose my money from the training camp, so I'll fight whoever it is. And you get rusty when you've had that long layoff. You know, Lucas Brown, he was hurt early on. Shagayev, because he hasn't really been in there, you know, at a high level for a long time, and he really wasn't mentally prepared for this. He kind of, in my opinion, more or less thought, okay, I have him hurt, and I'm going to finish this. And when that didn't happen, the steam more or less kind of, or the wind behind his sails kind of blew out, and Lucas Brown got his job done. You know, against you know, a lot of these other guys, these younger guys. No, I don't think that, you know, it's going to work out well for Lucas Brown. Whether, you know, you get somebody like a Joseph Parker or, you know, Anthony Joshua, you know, these guys who not only can box, but they're as big as you and they're as strong as you, probably stronger, you know, hit harder. So Lucas Brown, it's a great win. He made history. I hope he gets himself a couple nice defenses. As far as Shagayev, we know about the hepatitis issue. He's had other injuries. It might be time to hang him up, find something else to do. You know, there's really not much more to say about that fight, Bill. You know, that's. I wish I could elaborate on it more, but, you know, it was you know, a shocker, but not that much of a shocker.
No, I think Brown is going to get a good chance with Freza Oquendo. I think he has the ability to stop Oquendo. He's going to be that much bigger. And then
guys like that, yes.
Yeah,
yes,
but
guys like that,
and that's
yes.
Yeah, and that's the guy that they're ordering him to fight next. And then after that, he's going to get Luis Ortiz. So he'll at least get one successful defense, and he'll get at least one big payday. So hey, more power to Lucas Brown. Plus, he made history, so that's all good. But